Welcome to this short talk, actually three short talks, on improving your sight reading. I've done it in three sections. I thought it would be more interesting, really. The first section is going to be looking at sight reading generally. Part two, we're going to look at how you actually build the skills of sight reading, and part three on how you might practice sight reading. And it's very important that we really understand that everyone can sight read. So many people, for one reason or other, think, some people can sight read, some people can't. It's some kind of magical gift. Some have and some don't. And I fully believe, having done a lot of work, written quite a few books on sight reading, that it's something that can be taught, it's something that can be learned. Absolutely, we can improve our sight reading. So what happens to people when sight reading? They often become a bit shaky, even really rather confident ones. And there's a reason for that, which I'm going to explain as we go through these talks. But by the end of it, I hope that you will be confident and you will feel this is something I can learn to do better. Thought it might be useful just to answer the question, what's the point of sight reading? Why do we need to learn it? And there's a number of reasons. One, of course, we learn more music quickly. We certainly don't need to be told how it goes or listen to someone else play it. We can just read the music and we understand it, we get it. For that reason, we become much more independent, and that's a very important thing for all of us. If you happen to be doing exams, then of course you're going to get more marks because the sight reading bit you will just know how to do. And when you think that the sight reading piece in exams is a good deal more simple than the actual pieces that you've just been playing, maybe 2 levels more simple, you should be getting high marks. And I hope by the end of this you will feel confident that will be the case. And in a sense, it changes the role of teaching and learning and practice. Because if we are able to read music, we can then get on with more interesting aspects, thinking about the music itself and phrasing and interpretation and such like. And there's one more reason I'd just like to mention, quite a bigger, important reason, which is that it guarantees the continuation of this great art. Now, if no one could read music, then ultimately it would kind of stultify, and who knows where it would go. But the fact that people can read music allows the art to continue. So let's begin to look at it in a bit more detail. What will make you a better sight reader? And I want to give you 3 areas. And again, these 3 areas we will consider through these 3 short talks. The first is knowledge, and you just simply have to know stuff. You have to understand what it is that you're reading, and so we're going to talk about that, what it is that you need to understand. The second is building a technique, and just like we build our clarinet technique, we can build our sight reading technique, and again we're going to talk about that. And the third is temperament. In the sense that we need to have a positive attitude about the whole process and not to get negative, not to get frustrated, for example, always to keep on the positive side, and those things together will really help. Just in a little bit more detail, what do I mean by knowledge? And I mean by knowledge the ingredients of whatever the music is that we are going to read. We do need to understand those ingredients, and we need to understand them so well that they are kind of stored in part of our brain that we don't have to think about processing them, we just know them. And again, I will go into that as we go along. Technique is basically how we do it. And this I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you lots of ideas on ways that you can develop technical ways, literally technical things you can develop that are going to help you sight read. And temperament, really not much more than I've already said, how we feel about it. And as long as we're feeling positive about it, we can always move forward. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, and I often talk about this in my more general talks. This is what I call my musical map, my map of the musical world, my musical map of the world. That's where we live as musicians. That's our world. That's a kind of map of our world. And within a lesson, within a practice session, within any time that we are working with music, we are going to visit quite a number of those places. And what is really important is that we understand how they all connect, because they all do at some point connect. At some point we can find a connection between all those things. And that is how we begin to learn to think in a better way. It's quite deep-rooted in our psyche, in our minds, but really understanding how these things connect and knowing what they all really represent is going to help us in the long term. I'd like to take 3 areas out of that particular map: sight reading, but also the associated areas of oral and theory. In a sense, these 3 areas represent the roots of music. Let's just have a look at each one of those, because I'd like to kind of make an interesting statement in a moment. Reading, well, if we just try to define reading, the ability to process and understand music that we see. Theory is really the ability to process and understand music we see or hear. And oral, the ability to process and understand music we see or hear internally or externally. And the interesting thing is really they're all the same. And they really are all the same. So if we just get rid of that little gobbledygook, being musical is to be able to process and understand music we see or hear internally or externally. So those 3 areas are very much interconnected, and they, I think, in a sense, are not in a sense the roots of music, but the root. They are the single root, and if we get how they connect and we think along those lines, we really do begin to move forward. So I'm going to kind of refer to them in a sense quite a bit, but obviously we're concentrating on reading. And the way we interact with notation, in a sense, there is a little journey here. The first time we see a piece, we're sight reading it, and then when we see it again, we are rereading it. But the techniques really are fairly similar. So let's have a look first of all at how we read music. I'm going to give you a little activity to do now. Can you read this? And here's another one for you. And here's a third. How did you get on? I'm rather hoping you didn't get any of those. That's why I chose rather obscure languages. The first one is Icelandic. And of course, it means sight reading is easy. But it's not easy if you don't understand the language. The second one also means sight reading is easy, and it's Greek. The third one, actually, I'm not quite sure what it means. It's actually Klingon. And for those Star Trek fans there, I thought I'd introduce a bit of Klingon. But the point is that if you don't understand the language, then you really have to struggle. You really will be struggling when you're reading. Here's another little exercise. I'm going to put a little activity on the screen. And when I snap my fingers, I want you to start the activity. So read it, I'll snap my fingers, then you do the activity. I hope you managed to do that and you didn't think, oh my goodness, this is a really difficult thing to do. But it's quite a complex thing to do. Let's see the amount of stuff that you had to have in your mind to do it. Firstly, you have to understand what counting is. Then you have to understand the idea of counting silently. Then you have to understand how to count up to 10. Then you have to understand this bit of kind of coding, crotchet equals 60. And then, and that in itself is a concept, you do one thing, then you do something else. Then you have to understand that you have to snap your fingers, so you needed some technique. And also at mezzo forte. So an awful lot of stuff there, if you think about it. But I think you probably managed to do that without thinking, oh my goodness, this is really difficult. Because all those things I just went through are things you understand, deeply understand. You understand what counting is silently to 10. You know these things, and therefore you draw on these abilities. And maybe no one's ever asked you to draw upon them and put them in this particular context. But can you see that's really what music sight reading is all about? If we understand all the ingredients, it may be a new context, but we should be able to do it. So let's go back to our unhappy chap and start looking, what actually happens when we're given some sight reading. We're going to start by looking at the brain, which has 3 bits, which I'll come to in a moment. Now, have a look at this piece, as if I was going to ask you to come and play this now. And I presume you'd probably think, fine. Now have a look at this piece, and you may think, well, okay, but I'd need a bit of time. And what about this piece here? And you may decide, actually, I'd rather not do this, and run out of the room in a not a very good mood. And going back to the brain, the first little clip there is approached by our thinking brain. I say, right, I can do that, I understand all that, no problem. The second, we kind of bypass the thinking brain, and literally the blood bypasses these bits of brains and goes to other bits of brains, emotional brains. Oh no, I'd rather not do that, or at least if I'm going to do it, I need some time. And the third, we think, no thank you, I'm not going to do that at all, reptilian brain. And we kind of look at it and we don't really want to engage with it at all. And in fact, with reptilian brain, and for example, you're sitting probably in a nice quiet room at the moment. If the door opened and a tiger suddenly came into your room, you would go into reptilian brain, which is the famous fight or flight, because you don't really want to have too many decisions to make. Well, shall I do this or shall I do that or this? You just want, I'm either going to fight it or run away. And the brain goes into reptilian mode, where you just get those 2 choices, binary, and hopefully you make the right choice and do the right thing. There is actually a third F in reptilian brain, freeze. And if the panic, because this is what you go into panic reptilian brain is panic brain. If you go into this place, sometimes your brain cannot work out the way forward. And that basically is what happens when a lot of people sight read. It just looks like gobbledygook. It happens in exams. I've seen it happen many times in exams. And you don't know what it's all about. We want to take our thinking to the thinking brain when we sight read. A little bit about the eye. It's quite a complicated piece of equipment, which I'm not going to talk about, but it's what we use. And I want you to read something. If you have a friend available, and you can come back onto this, what I'd like you to do is to read this and get your friend to look into your eyes while you're reading it, then swap over, you look into the eyes of your friend while they're reading it, and just have a look. Because what you'll find, interestingly, is that the eye moves in little... Well, I won't tell you the word, I'm going to tell you that in a minute, but your eye does not move smoothly. It sort of moves in, well, I will say, little jerks across the line, taking in clearly quite a number of words at the same time. I'm going to put some words on the screen in a second for a very short time and see whether you can read them. Here we go, the first one. Did you get that? It was the cat sat on the mat, and it was 5 words, and it was on the screen there. Very short time. Here's the next one. Did you get that? That was 11 words, a familiar phrase, but then, music is made up of familiar phrases, but I think you probably got that in one glance. Here's another one. Name of a most excellent book series, if you got that one. And here's another one. Did you get that? I think you probably did. And of course, what I did there was not only to do it backwards and upside down. Well, no, I did it backwards and upside down, but I think you would have got that. It's a lovely day today, because I wanted to show you how incredibly powerful the brain is. The next one's a bit of music. Have a go at this one. Did you get that? An upward G major scale, I'm sure you got that. And probably you might even be able to remember the rhythm. So, what point I'm making here is that our eyes work like a camera, and each snap can absorb a lot of material. So let's go into a little bit more detail now on how we actually learn to sight read. And I want to show you three basic elements that I want us to be aware of. The first is having an idea of the rhythm and rhythmic patterns. And it's a big part. And if there's any misunderstanding or hesitation really in looking at a rhythm or rhythm pattern and not really getting it, then sight reading's never going to work. So let's ask this question. What is having a sense of rhythm? And two things really I want to mention here. Number one, it's fundamentally about pulse. We have to have a sense of pulse. What does that mean, a sense of pulse? What do we mean by that? And I just want to show you the way that I teach pulse. And if you haven't thought about this in any detail, just go through these exercises and you'll see what I mean. So maybe let's start off by counting out 4 in a bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. And clapping it at the same time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. So we are really sensing, we're feeling, we are making that pulse. Number 2 is to whisper it. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do that for a bit, still clapping quietly. Now we're going to mouth it silently. So I was mouthing silently with my counting. Now I'm not going to mouth it, I'm simply going to hear those numbers in my head. I'm also stopping clapping now, so I'm hearing those numbers in my head. And the final step in this process is to stop hearing the numbers and to sense that pulse. And different people have different ways. When I do this exercise, with people, what are you feeling at that point? A throb, an echo, a sensation. But that is a sense of pulse. That's your sense of pulse. And you can practice that, and you need to be absolutely assured it's there. And the second element is being able to subdivide that pulse into whatever appropriate subdivisions you need for the particular work or piece that you're playing. So for example, you may play a C major scale, and each subdivision, each note in your head, you subdivide it. Bum, 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 bum. That's quite a nice subdivision. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or you can fill the whole scale with a quaver subdivision or triplet subdivision. I like this particular version of it because you are changing subdivision on every note, which of course is what we do when we're playing music, because unless the piece has the same rhythmic values all the way through. And if you can feel that sort of instant subdivision, then rhythm and rhythmic patterns are never going to be a problem to you. So that's just an introduction to that. It will allow you to decode patterns instantly. That's a kind of introduction to the rhythmical side of things. Number 2 is about pitch, reading notes and recognizing melodic patterns. So when we see a pattern like this, for example, we see it as a pattern, like the cat sat on the mat. We see that pattern. We know certain things about it. They're ascending. We know that they are next door notes. We know they're the first 5 notes of C major, for example, and we instinctively feel those notes in our fingers. And that's really the way I want to. There's a lot more I could say about that, but here, that's just as much as I want to say. When you look at the pitch, I want you to begin to be aware of seeing patterns. There will always be patterns there. And the final of these 3 basic elements is combining the rhythm with the notes, whilst maintaining a steady pulse. And I just want to give you some golden rules here. The first is when you are sight reading, and if you're sight reading for a particular purpose, check first for technical problems. If it's important that you get it right first time, just have a look. Any technical problems, for example, crossing the break, alternate fingerings required. If it's in a key like C minor, for example, you may want to think which way around the bell notes you're going to go. But just have a look, because we don't want suddenly to be faced with a technical problem, not sure how to overcome that. And that's very much within the second point, which is just have a look and make sure you do understand. The preparation you might do is all about making sure, yes, I understand that piece, I know what it's going to say, I will be able to play it. And all this will add up to faster brain processing. We are processing quite fast when we are sight reading, and I want you to have confidence that that is going to be a possibility. And I think if we understand there's no technical problems, we prepared it, we understand it, we can train our brains to really concentrate, be in the subject, in the moment, process a bit faster, and get it right as a result. And that really is part of our technique that we are developing. That's an introduction really to this technique we're going to develop. And in part 2, we're going to talk about actually building sight reading skills.